Welcome to this screencast of lecture number 3 on postmodernism. This is for the module Organizational Analysis and Change. In this lecture I want to look at postmodernism, and while this is a word you have come across on a number of occasions, probably during your soon 3 years, you may not be too familiar with the people who we usually associate with postmodernism. And what I want to do today is to give you a flavor of what these people had to say, and basically give them some life. So how I started this lecture with reading a short piece from Baudrillard from his piece Simulacra and Simulation, which was an ironic piece about Disneyland. And I just started with this to give you an idea of how the language is usually being used in postmodernism. Then we're looking at the definition of postmodernism, and important here is a distinction between postmodernism as a periodization, name or a label, if you like, for a particular time period. And the other is to think about postmodernism more as a theoretical perspective. We will come back to that, but what we started off doing was I showed you a number of pictures. And I showed you pictures. Here is one in fashion, and I contrasted this with another picture in fashion just to ask you which one is the postmodern. And for this particular one, I think almost 95% of you said number 1, which is all correct. That's a design by 2 Russian designers who are associated with postmodernism. And I mainly did this to show how postmodernism is important in fashion, art, architecture, literature, and other things. Then I wanted you to look at 2 pictures from architecture. This is the first one, which is the former AT&T building in New York City, built in 1984. It is now the Sony building. It was built by Philip Johnson. And then I contrasted with this villa. And the vast majority of you thought that number 2 was an illustration of postmodernism. But in actual fact, that's a very famous modernist building by Corbusier. And I was trying to make some points here about, in the first case, postmodernism being very interested in references. There's a lot of referentiality, and there's a play to it, some kind of humor, which you can see with the broken top of the Sony building. I then looked at art, postmodern art. So this is urinal, and that's another piece of art which basically is text written on the wall. This was quite even, but the majority went for number 1, which is a very famous artwork by Marcel Duchamp. But I was also telling you the story how a person actually urinated in that one, another artist, and he was considering himself a postmodern one. So this was just to start off with some pictures of what postmodernism may look like. We're then looking at 4 particular people: Michel Foucault, Jacques Derrida, François Lyotard, and Jean Baudrillard. And all of these people are very often associated with postmodernism. Foucault and Derrida may be the most famous of them, but Lyotard and Baudrillard are perhaps more strongly associated with postmodernism. They're all very French, and sometimes postmodernism is called French theory. There are some overlaps between it anyway. It is a very French, but not exclusively French phenomenon. So I was talking a little bit about Foucault, his political engagement. I was talking, this is from a biography where apparently he was involved in some student protest, but he was very careful about a new shirt that he just bought, a black velour shirt. And then I was talking a bit about his early career, where people didn't really accept him because he thought he wrote in an unconventional way and his ideas didn't really work well. And he had a period in Uppsala which didn't work out too well. Uppsala is maybe a little bit on the conservative side, and it's a famous episode in his life. I then talked about 3 main books: Madness and Civilization, The Birth of the Prison, and History of Sexuality. And then I talked a little bit about what many biographers have focused on, his more personal interest in sadomasochism. Again, that's not extremely relevant to understanding postmodernism, but I just want to do this to, you know, give some life to these pictures, so they just don't remain an anonymous name. The second one is Jacques Derrida. I was talking a little bit about his upbringing in Alger. He was a very talented footballer. I was talking about an interesting episode in Prague where the police, he was there to help some dissidents, and the police planted cocaine and got him into jail. But Derrida, who at the time had very strong connections with the Mitterrand administration, could pull some strings, and quite soon he was being released. And I talked about some of his more famous book of grammatology. That's where you find descriptions of deconstruction and writing indifference. And then the postcard, which is a series of love letters actually to a mistress. Then I talked about François Lyotard, who wanted to become a monk, a painter, or a historian, but apparently he failed with all of that. Apparently he couldn't become a historian because he had a very bad memory. And then the book that's probably closest or most directly associated with postmodernism is Lyotard's book, The Postmodern Condition, which came out in 1979 and translated in 1984. And it's from that book, the very beginning, that you find the definition of postmodernism as an incredulity towards meta-narratives. So we discussed this a little bit. Finally is Jean Baudrillard, and I couldn't find too much biographical details about him, but he's quite famous for having been the inspiration for the following film, which many of us made. And this is a longer scene where Leo, played by Keanu Reeves,
as you no doubt have guessed,
either go back
I am Morpheus.
A life that is characterized by
the honor is mine.
Illusion, or if you wanted to
Please.
see how the world really looked like.
Sit.
So we looked at this. This is the famous scene where he's given to take either the blue or the red pill. And in that film you have a direct reference to simulacra and simulation. The picture you see there is from the film, and that's the name of one of Baudrillard's most famous books. But Baudrillard wasn't too keen on the way his theories was used in this film, and said that most of it was stemming from misunderstandings. So this is just, again, a sort of playful thing. I was asking you if you would have 1 week at Mallorca, who of these 4 people you would bring along. And the majority of you went for Michel Foucault, and then number 2 I think was Lyotard, probably because I said he had a bad memory. And maybe that's a good quality to have if you're going to do a 1 week holiday on Mallorca.